The pager clipped to my hip at 11:40 on a Tuesday night, and I knew before I even looked at the screen that it was going to be one of those shifts. Code Blue Med-Surg 4. Code Blue Med-Surg 4. I was 3 years into nursing, and I still felt my stomach drop every time those words came over the speakers, even when it wasn't my patient, even when I was only running toward it because that's what you do. I got there second, right behind Dr. Whitfield from cardiology, who I'd exchanged maybe a dozen sentences with in 18 months of working 2 floors apart. He didn't say anything. He never did, not more than he had to. He just moved into the room like he'd been standing outside the door, waiting for exactly this, hands already snapping into gloves, voice low and even while he called out orders that made the chaos organize itself into something survivable. I bagged. I pushed meds when he nodded at me. 12 minutes later, Mr. Alvarez in bed 4 had a pulse again, and Dr. Whitfield stepped back, peeled his gloves off, and said only, "Good work," to the room in general, and left. That was Marcus Whitfield, quiet almost to the point of unsettling, the kind of doctor other doctors gossiped about because nobody could get a read on him. But here's the strange part, the part I didn't let myself think about too hard for a long time. He was always there. Not just at codes, when I was drowning under 6 admissions and a discharge and a family that wouldn't stop yelling at me in the hallway. Somehow he'd appear, ask the charge nurse a completely unrelated question, and end up staying long enough to help me hang a bag or talk down the family himself. When I locked my keys in my car at 2 in the morning in an empty parking garage, his black sedan pulled up not 10 minutes later, like he just happened to be leaving at that exact moment for the 3rd time that month. I used to joke about it with Priya, my closest friend on the floor. "It's like he's got a sensor on me," I said one night in the break room, peeling the foil off a cup of the world's worst coffee. "Maybe he likes you," Priya said, not even looking up from her chart. "He's barely said 40 words to me in a year." "Some men communicate through logistics," she said, and I laughed so hard I nearly choked. But some small, stubborn part of me turned the idea over anyway, late at night, in the quiet after a hard shift, wondering what it would be like if it were true, if underneath that wall of silence there was something aimed, on purpose, at me. I told myself it was nothing. Attendings look out for nurses. It's not romance, it's just decency. And decency is rare enough that it feels like more than it is. That's the story I built for myself, brick by brick, because it was safer than the alternative, safer than hoping. There was a night in March I still think about. A 19-year-old came in after a car accident, and I was the primary on him for 11 straight hours, and around hour 9, I finally cracked in the supply closet, silent tears, hand pressed over my own mouth so nobody would hear. The door opened. It was him. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't say anything comforting, no platitudes, nothing. He just stood there, arms crossed, present, like a wall you could lean your weight against without either of you acknowledging you were leaning. After maybe 2 minutes, he said, "Your patient's stable, you did that," and left. I splashed water on my face and went back to work, and something in my chest had loosened just enough to get through the rest of the night. I want to tell you I figured it out then, but I didn't. I was tired in the way that hollows you out, the kind of tired where you stop asking why good things happen and just take them, grateful and half suspicious, like a stray animal circling food someone keeps leaving out. It went on that way for almost 2 years. Small rescues, silent appearances. A coffee left on the nurse's station counter on mornings I'd worked a double. No note, but I always knew. I started to depend on it in a way I wasn't proud of, this idea that if things got bad enough, he'd materialize. I stopped bringing it up with Priya because saying it out loud made it feel both more real and more foolish. Then my mother got sick. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a slow, grinding decline that ate up my weekends and my sick days, and eventually my ability to be fully present on a unit where being fully present is the entire job. I made a mistake in April, not a catastrophic one, a near miss, a wrong dose caught before it reached the patient, but enough. Enough for a write-up, enough for the kind of scrutiny that makes you start doubting your own hands. I put in my resignation in May. I told myself it was about my mother, and it was, mostly, but it was also about not trusting myself in those hallways anymore. Dr. Whitfield wasn't on the floor the day I cleared out my locker. I remember being almost relieved and almost devastated in the same breath because some ridiculous, hopeful part of me had pictured him showing up one more time, the way he always did, right on cue. He didn't. I left without so much as a goodbye, and I told myself that answered the question I'd never quite let myself ask. Whatever it had been, it was over now, and maybe it had never been what I thought. 3 months later, I ran into Priya at a farmer's market, and after the hugging and the catching up, she got quiet in a way that made me brace myself. "You never knew, did you?" she said. "Knew what?" "About Marcus and your mom." I stood there holding a bag of peaches like it had turned to stone in my hand. It turned out my mother had been his patient years before I ever started on that unit, a cardiology case, complicated, the kind that leaves a mark on a young doctor. Priya said he'd told her once, in a rare unguarded moment at a holiday party, that my mother had been kind to him during a rotation when everyone else on staff treated residents like furniture, and that he never forgot it. When I got hired 2 years later, he recognized my last name on the schedule before he ever recognized my face. He'd asked around, quietly, confirmed it, and decided, in that silent, deliberate way of his, that he would simply keep an eye on her daughter. Not out of romance, not exactly, though Priya swore up and down there was more to it than debt repaid, watching how he'd looked at me across a nurse's station more than once. He'd simply made a private promise to himself and never once let me see the shape of it, because he thought explaining it would have made it about him, and he never wanted it to be about him. I sat in my car in that farmer's market parking lot for a long time after Priya left, peaches sweating in the bag on the passenger seat, running back through 2 years of small mercies and perfectly timed doors opening, and I didn't know whether to feel grateful or robbed. He had shown up for me for 2 years for a reason I never got to ask about. Care that I had quietly, privately started to hope was about me specifically, only to learn it started somewhere I wasn't even in the room. Does it matter, in the end, why someone shows up, if they always do? Or does the reason change everything, even retroactively, even after the fact? I called the hospital operator, my hand shaking a little, and asked to be connected to cardiology, and asked for Dr. Whitfield, and was told gently that he'd left the hospital himself that spring, not long after I did, no forwarding information on file. Nobody seemed to know where he'd gone. I still don't know what I would have said if he'd picked up. Thank you, maybe. Or why didn't you just tell me? Or something with no good words at all, the kind of feeling that sits in your chest without a name. My mother passed that autumn peacefully at home with me holding her hand, and in the blur of the weeks after, I found myself talking to her sometimes about him, asking her, half joking, half not, if she remembered a quiet resident who used to hover near her room decades ago. She didn't, not by name, but she smiled anyway, the way she did at every story I brought her near the end, and said, "Sounds like he was a good one." And I said yes, he was, and left it there, because some things you carry instead of solving. I think about him sometimes still, on nights when the world goes quiet the way it used to in that supply closet, wondering if somewhere he thinks about a promise he kept to a woman he barely knew, wondering if he ever wanted me to find out, or if he'd have been content letting it stay a mystery forever. I wonder too what I would have wanted if it had been my choice to make, to know the reason behind every kindness, or to simply let it be kindness, uncomplicated, unexplained, and enough on its own. I still haven't decided. Maybe you already have.